In tonight's Writing China, Han Nang to the words of master Chinese poet Xi Chuan. Why is his approach so groundbreaking? That interview right after this break. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Today we bring you the second installment of the Writing China series, one of the series featuring the 40 years anniversary of China's reform and opening up. The interviews with prominent authors will be aired throughout this week. In the 1980s, just as China was beginning to give the world a glimpse of its rich heritage, literature and the arts was blossoming among the younger generation. Many brilliant young poets at the time breathed life into words that moved, inspired, enlightened, and invigorated readers. I spoke with one of China's contemporary poets, Xi Chuan. He shared his unique insight as a wordsmith and how he approaches his and his peers' work with such poetic license. Most notably, he introduced the seminal work of his contemporary Haizi to a much wider audience. Before the exclusive interview, take a look at this.
Some say poetry is either genius or madness. In late 20th century, China has seen several outstanding poets. Their works are immortalized in people's mind and have inspired generations after them. Debasement is the password of the base, nobility the epitaph of the noble. I love not only your statelessness, but also your firm stand, the earth beneath you. Even with these dark eyes, a gift of the dark night, I go to seek the shining light. Among them, Haizi is one of the most beloved poets, who committed suicide at the age of 25. His death is regarded as a turning point in contemporary Chinese literature. As his best friend, poet Xi Chuan has edited the complete poems of Haizi, which includes illustrations drawn by Haizi himself.
Haizi's poem in Chinese. 黑夜从大地上升起，遮住了光明的天空。丰收后荒凉的大地，黑夜从你内部上升。你从远方来，我到远方去，遥远的路程经过这里。黑夜一无所有，为何给我安慰？
Although his poetic oeuvre is relatively small, his archetypal descriptions of the rural and natural world, now virtually extinguished by industrialization, have a lyric intensity that is richly evocative. At that passionate and romantic age, the two poets shared a great time.
Because I know that Haizi is a genius. There's a young artist, young stage director. Every year she directs a play in memory of Haizi. And she always used the word genius. And I told her, for you, genius is a word. For me, that's a person with flesh. I feel that I was lucky to be Haizi's friend and Luo Yihe's friend in 1980s.
You are not just a friend. You were actually the one who worked very hard to push their poetry in front of the public eyes. You were a promoter.
I'm the editor of Haizi's complete poems, the book. That is about 1,100 pages. So that's a thick book, like a dictionary.
What about that complete work of Haizi? When you were editing it?
At that time, I didn't have a laptop or a computer, so I have to copy his poems in handwriting. So usually I worked for 1 week in copying his poems, and then I stopped for 1 week, and then I need a week for my own writing. And then next week should be a week for Haizi. And sometimes I felt that Haizi, he wrote some dreadful poems about ghosts, about bones, about these things. So I remember that one night I had to stop in writing. And I have to stop to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I felt that I should stop in doing this if a ghost will emerge suddenly. But then after 10, nothing happened. So I went on with my work in editing his poems. And that was also a hard time for me. And suddenly I felt that I was alone in this world. And also I was at a loss. Not only because of Haizi and Luo Yihe's deaths, but also because of the big change of the Chinese society.
I remember you were talking about yourself and the way you felt about yourself. You said you, quote, became a useless man. That was the time when you lost your 2 friends.
I don't know. Later I feel that I became a blind person. In 1980s, I felt that I had aims or one big aim, that is to be a writer, to be a poet, and to know whom you are. But later I lost this aim, so I told others that I became a blind person. I have to confess to myself that I don't know who I am. And I need to understand myself, not only about me, myself, but also about the society, also about the history, also about the life and death.
What about the society? What about the history? What questions you were urgently looking for answers?
About God. Although I'm not a Christian.
Religious?
No, I'm not religious. But let me take this as an example. Before, I felt that I know the face of God. But later I felt that maybe I need to know something about the back of God. And then I tried to turn to the back of God to see to see it. So it's
the end of naivety?
Yeah, that's a good word. Naivety.
Or the end of the innocence. Those are very...
Oh yes, that's a good word. You know, English poet William Blake, and William Blake said that a person at the beginning of his life, he lived an innocent life, and then he had to get into a step of experience or experiences. So I felt that in 1990s, I stepped onto this step of experience, and he had a poem called Tiger. So tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night. But then he had another poem that is Lamb. And so he took lamb and on the one hand, and the other hand is tiger.
And since then, you become a tiger or a lamb? I just want to use an analogy, because are you a totally different person since then? You graduated in a way?
I don't know how to put it, but before I understood bright things, luminous things. But
aspirations.
Later, yes. And but later I felt that I need to know something about the evil things and the dark side of life.
Did you have any poems about that?
Oh.
Yourself being, in a way, very observing?
Yeah, later I got an ability, I have to say, I got an ability of understanding absurdities.
Do you like yourself, the one you had back in the 1980s, or you like yourself even better after you see or after you saw the back of the God?
You know, young people, younger than me, they sometimes ask me to tell them some stories about from 1980s. But I always tell them, that I'm not a person who's always feel nostalgia for 1980s. I think only those people who had accomplished their jobs. So I think it is their right to think about 1980s again and again. But me, I feel that I'm a person still working, still walking and working. And so I seldom go back to 1980s. Between poetry and philosophy, or between poetry, maybe a religion or something else.
That's very interesting.
Between us.
Can you give us some examples?
After 1992, I started to write prose poems. And lots of Chinese readers, they were not used to my way of writing after 1992. And they feel that that's not poetry. Because ordinary people, they understand that poetry should be in lines with rhymes.
You want to break that?
Yeah, I want to.
What did you do?
I brought some ideas into poetry writing. I feel that poetry is not poetry. This word is not only for lyrical poetry, because usually people feel that. To give ideas, that's a task of philosophers. But I feel that poets also have, they need to at least to know something about these philosophical things. I have a series of poems. There's one, the title is What the Eagle Says. I'm trying to talk in a crazy way, I have to say. Oh, I have another series of poems, that is, I try to give definitions to words. For instance, bird. And bird, you have a definition in the dictionary. And I'm trying to give new definitions. I invented. Not only about birds, about city, about this term city, this word, about what else? Fire or shadow. And I try to give the definition in a very official way. But
Sichuan's official version.
But what I talk there, what I have there, could be something absurd.
We are very much looking forward to listening to those poems.
Yeah. Grandmother. My grandmother coughs, waking 1,000 roosters. 1,000 roosters crow, waking 10,000 people. 10,000 people walk out of the village. Roosters in the village still crowing. The crowing roosters stop. My grandmother still coughing. My still coughing grandmother mentions her grandmother, her voice getting softer, as if it were my grandmother's grandmother's voice getting softer. My grandmother talks and talks, then stops, shutting her eyes, as if it were only now that my grandmother's grandmother really died.
What interests you the most these days that you would like eventually put it on paper?
I've just finished a very long essay on Tang poetry. Chinese people, it seems that the Chinese people had a definite way of in reading these poets. So I'm trying to tell something new, to tell something fresh, to give new ways in reading these poets.
But why? I mean, Xu Guan, why? Chinese society is changing so fast.
Yes.
Why do you have to go back?
Actually, you've given me the answer. That is, the Chinese society changed so rapidly. And then, because of this, right because of this, I am having a way of looking at Tang Dynasty society.
What do you mean by that?
For instance, what's the relationship between poetry writing and the social changes? And you can't read Tang poetry only according to, only as dead poems, only as knowledge. But they are heritages for us. But the poets from Tang Dynasty, when they were writing the poems, they were writing just like us writing at this time. The social changes, well, gives me such an opportunity to find something new there in Tang poetry.
What did you find?
Because, for instance, in Tang Dynasty, there are also monk poets. And so beside Li Bai and Du Fu, there were poets like Han Shan, who is very famous in other countries, in the United States, in Europe. His name was translated into like this, the Cold Mountain. But in Chinese, that's Han Shan. And, but Han Shan was not the only monk poet from Tang Dynasty. There is another person, his name is Wang Fanzhi, and also a very famous monk of Zen Buddhism, Huineng. They wrote with a kind of vernacular Chinese. They were away from the mainstream of the Tang Dynasty. And that, for me, that's quite interesting.
It's very interesting to talk about, you got to know the God at the very beginning when you were very young. And then you got to know, as you see it, the back of the God. And now, it seems that you try to see within yourself.
Yeah, I also want to know my limitations. So my possibilities and also my limitations. I have to say that my brain is crowded with concepts from the Western world. Well, then I traveled to countries like India, like Turkey, like Egypt. Because of my experiences of traveling to these less advanced countries, I feel that maybe the whole issue is not so simple.
Xi Chuan, one of the most well-known contemporary Chinese poets. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight CGTN, into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.